Funding for Off 90 is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.
Cruising your way next, Off 90. A man who went to Vietnam on a dare. The restoration of a cupola. Christmas times 900. Plus, an industry of the past. There's the exit up ahead for our next stop, Off 90. Hi, I'm Barbara Keith. Thanks for joining me on this journey off 90. A neighbor told William Curman not to become a paratrooper. Young William took that as a dare, so he joined the paratroopers and ended up fighting in Vietnam. Soon after joining the paratroopers, William realized his neighbor was warning him, not daring him. This is the story of what happened to William in Vietnam and beyond.
I had a neighbor that was a paratrooper, and I have to say I liked the boots. They had their boots were pretty cool, the uniform was pretty cool, and he told me, don't do it. And I thought it was because he wanted to be the only guy in the neighborhood that was a paratrooper. But as it turns out, he was giving me advice. My name is William Curman, and I'm a Vietnam veteran. I was a paratrooper infantryman, was the 173rd Airborne Brigade. They sometimes used to like to say things like death from above. I was there a little over a year. I spent time in the jungles, in the rice paddies, in the mountains. I volunteered for the draft. I went to Solomon Juneau High School in Milwaukee, which would be considered a lower middle class school. When I was in high school, I was assuming I was going to Vietnam before I graduated, and I already had friends that had been killed in Vietnam. And so I volunteered for the draft. Paratrooper is definitely volunteer, and it's an elite corps. I thought of myself as being very tough. So, and I also, there was a little bit of that hooray for our side. Mostly say hooray for our side. And I thought that we were helping the people in Vietnam. We were, going off to fight communism and stopping it there before they, came to Texas or somewhere. I carried usually about a 90-pound pack when I would start out, because it would have food for, about a week, plus ammunition. Since we were sent into places that seemed to be extremely dangerous, I thought I was better off if I was kind of out front looking for things, because I felt I was good at it, detecting tripwires and all that sort of stuff. So I would volunteer for stuff. And as I was in Vietnam, I was seeing that I had been lied to about things about the war and what was going on. So I didn't like being there. The main thing for me was survival, and the survival of the people around me. I was wounded near Tuiwa in 1968. When I was wounded, it was from an ambush. I was hit by a Chinese Claymore landmine. I was hit in the foot, calf, forearm, and hand. When I was in the hospital, it got rocketed while I was there. I heard that our unit had taken a lot of casualties, and when I got back to it, there were not really any old timers left. So I started walking point again and this was because I knew that I probably would do it the best and I would keep us the safest. And I extended in Vietnam, beyond my year tour of duty so I could get out of the military sooner. I remember flying over Milwaukee. The city had changed. I couldn't get used to civilization. It was very difficult for me. I remember I went with my buddies somewhere and I saw a woman who was a friend of mine from way back that I had sort of a crush on. And she went across 68th Street in Milwaukee, and it's a busy street. And I was afraid to cross the street. I couldn't figure out how to deal with all the cars. I couldn't figure out how to deal with all the cars, and I just stood there for a long time until someone else came and started across the street, and I got kind of in step with them and went across the street after them. The VA was terrible at that time. And I went to the VA, for like a physical and the stuff like that you have to do. There was a piece of shrapnel that started coming out of my right hand. And by that time, I disliked the VA so much that I decided to take a razor blade and cut it out myself. I mean, it was already trying to come out, and when I wasn't doing anything with it at first, but when I would put my hand in my pocket, it would get caught and hurt a little bit. So I drank like probably a pint of brandy and sat in a chair and took a razor blade and cut it out. And I didn't have anything to do with the VA until a few years ago, because I had a relapse of malaria. I had malaria when I was in Vietnam. I had malaria when I was in the jungle. And we were moving secretly, and they couldn't bring in a chopper to get me out. And they started taking all of my equipment from me because I couldn't carry it anymore. And then it got to a point, we were in mountains too, and it got to a point where another soldier had to help support me as I was going, but they wouldn't bring in a chopper. And then one of the guys fell and broke his back, and they brought a chopper in. It was Mitchell Hall in Milwaukee at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. I went out the door after a class, and there were some hooches set up on the lawn in front of Mitchell Hall, and some guys in combat fatigues. And I went up to one of them and I said, "What are you guys doing?" And they were Vietnam vets, and they said they were staying until the war ended. So I went home and got a sleeping bag and joined them. And that was the start of Vietnam Veterans Against the War in Milwaukee. That was the Milwaukee chapter. I think the support of those guys was one of the things that kept me from killing myself, because I was very suicidal at the time. And some of my friends did kill themselves right around that time too, that were non-vets. I was the first person arrested during the student strike to end the Vietnam War at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And I was beaten by the police, and I was thrown across the length of the paddy wagon. I remember when I hit the back of the wall of the paddy wagon and slid down, I heard the officer inside say, "Long-haired bastards, we should ship them all off to Vietnam." Before Vietnam War, I believed the things that I was being told by my government, mainly because I felt the United States had saved the world in World War II, and I decided that this was my chance to help save the world from something evil. And then very shortly after I got there, and people I knew died, I realized that I probably wasn't going to be able to save the world. And I was pretty sure then that no one was going to save the world. The world was just going to be, and I was just another, pawn moving around on its surface. Well, I've been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, like very high degree, and that stuff doesn't seem to really go away. It's like it comes back in waves. It's sort of like trying to decide if you have a right to be alive. I know that there's more people on the planet than it's easy for the planet to support. And am I worthy of life? Just because you're born, I'm not sure if that means you're worthy of life. I think it's a good idea to try and earn. They talk about earning a living. I guess that's, I don't think of it about jobs. I think about it as being a useful member, I suppose, of society.
What's a cupola? Perhaps you've heard the word before, but you don't really know what it means. It sounds like it could be a form of dance or a musical instrument. It's actually a small dome, especially a small dome on a drum on top of a larger dome, adorning a roof or ceiling. Cupolas are regularly on the roofs of barns. We tagged along during the restoration of one such cupola.
I've known Fred my whole life. I grew up just west of town.
We took the cupola off from the barn with Dave and Fred and all of us. We've been friends for years.
Dave contacted me, wanted to know if I would help him do sheet metal work on the cupola. So he brought the parts over and I helped him put it back together.
I just had an idea and we took cupola off the roof and rebuilt it and give it back to Fred.
This was a surprise to me. With the replacement of the cupola, for some reason, my good friend Dave here decided to take care of it, and these other guys, which I say are my friends, helped him out. I'm Fred Alvin, I own Alvin Hardware in Rose Creek.
Dan Morm, I'm from Austin.
I'm Dave Whalen.
Bob Lau, live over by Austin.
That's what it is, I guess.
Partners in crime.
Yeah, right, yep.
I don't know, quite a few years ago.
I think we were out there to the fire at one time, it was, and then we just started talking. Or they were going to tear the barn down, I think?
They were gonna tear the barn down. And Fred got to talking and he says, God, I believe that's one of my grandpa's cupolas. I like history. And when I found out whether his grandfather done this or not, it sparked me. I mean, I thought I gotta save it. I'm into that. And I got to thinking, okay, I got a hold of the Nelson brothers who owns the property to make sure it'd be okay with them. I got a hold of Dan, see if he would take it off because it was a big barn. And then after we had it all down, I got a hold of Bob, and he's kind of a master sheet metal sort of fella, to replace some of it. And the center section was total gone. It was actually broke away from it, so I rebuilt some of that. He done the sheet metal work on it. We done that in my shop right over here, and every time he'd get close, we'd close the door.
I don't know how you ever kept it from me.
Yeah, we did. And then I had John Nystrom do the lettering for me on it from Nystrom Signs. Anyhow, these guys all agreed I didn't have to fight with them or nothing.
There was a lot of wind. We had a lot of wind that day.
It was cold.
And it was cold. And all of a sudden, you know, we just more or less just went up there with our boom and ropes and cut it off and brought it down. Dave asked me to help. You bet I'd be there.
Absolutely
You
was
bet.
the word I got.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You bet. I'm all about that.
Yeah.
I'm all about, and if it was about him, you bet.
Yeah.
I'd be there. I'd be there right away.
Well, the project took about 6 years total, but we didn't work on it all the time.
Part-time.
Yeah, we just worked on it when we had a chance, and I think Dan was probably the most frustrated. Are we ever going to give him that cupola? And oh yeah, it's going to happen. I'll let you know. But yeah, it took time. After we got it down, there was so much more damage to it than what it looked like up on the roof. The parts where all the ornate work that he'd done on it, that we saved. It's quite neat. It's got a shingle effect on the bottom part, and it's, I don't know, kind of a viney thing around the middle.
It's got animals and stuff.
Yeah.
We still, I think we might have some of that stuff up in the warehouse yet here from those days yet. Maybe I'll give them to Bob Lau.
Yeah. Start building cupolas.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a piece of art. It really is.
They retain the bullet holes. Anybody that's familiar with a cupola knows that pigeons like to roost up there, and it was a common thing to shoot them down. But not everyone hit the bird. They did miss and hit the cupola. And those remained in there, I think, didn't they, Bob?
Yep.
All of them?
Yep.
All of them except the center section.
Yeah.
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 That's new.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know
That's-
if there's any in the center section or not.
Not yet.
No.
Well, there's a rolled bead edge, a wire edge around the outside edge of it. And that was probably the most challenging, but once I got it figured out again, I hadn't done it for probably 30 years. And once I got that figured out, then it went pretty good.
He done a nice job.
Yep. Very nice.
Thanks.
I don't think that Bob's going to make a living out of making cupolas
No, I don't
again.
think so.
But, matter of fact, I don't think anybody even knows what they are,
Yeah.
or what they were for. Or
Yeah.
When
don't see 'em.
When I got that last piece from him, he says, "This better be it, because I don't want no more." I got the guys all together over in my shop across the street here, across the alley. And I just walked over here and I says, "You busy for a couple minutes?" "No, what's going on now?" And I says, "I need you over here in the shop." And then he just walked in there, and all the names around it on the cupola, and Jamie had his grandson here, which be his son and his grandson. We're all there, so he kind of figured it out.
I knew he was up to something, but I tried to stall him even that day. I had to wait
Yeah.
on some more people yet, and he had to come back a second time to get me.
Yeah.
But everybody was there at that time. The Nelson brothers were there.
Yeah.
John Nystrom, he was there.
Jamie, his son, and his grandson pulled it with their service truck and pulled it through the parade.
If you drive by the shop someday and you see it sitting on the roof, you'll know we got busy.
Can't get enough Christmas? That's how Helen Holder of Austin thought. She started collecting nativity scenes several years ago, and now her sets number over 900. We stopped by Helen's place to take a look at her collection.
Well, the joke at our house at Christmas time is that you can't eat because the table is covered. You can't cook because the stove is covered. But actually, we do make a little space on the table, and I can clear off the stove to make it possible for us to live with these. I'm Helen Holder, and I'm a retired school teacher and collector of nativity sets. Nativity scene has a long history of being the way that people are reminded of the Christmas story. It started out as dramas in churches and went from there to figures in the rich people's homes, and then smaller into people's homes, and was carried around the world. And you can find nativity scenes wherever you go. Christmas is celebrating Jesus coming to people, and the variety of nativity sets shows you that he came for all people. And all the traditions that go along with the nativity scenes are bringing people bringing it into the present for each person that looks at them. So I made an origami one, and then I bought two, and I decided every year I would buy one new one for Christmas. But once I started looking for nativity sets, and there are so many different interpretations and so many different countries that are represented, that pretty soon I've got 900. Everybody always used to ask me which is my favorite nativity set. And 2 years ago I had everybody in my family, children, grandchildren, were assigned to make a piece. And so now I can say that's my favorite nativity, because each person and animal in the nativity is made by somebody in the family. I'm married to Bill Holder, who is also a retired school teacher. And he's a big supporter of my hobby. He carries all the boxes up the stairs, and when I empty them, he carries the empties back downstairs and reverses the process when we're putting them away. The Convention and Visitors Bureau has us listed in their book about Austin sites, and so during the Christmas season, they schedule bus tours to come to see the Nativity House. We ask for people to give a $1 donation to the Salvation Army. So last year I was given an official little red kettle to put their donations in, and I bought a Byers Caroler Salvation Lassie playing the trombone to stand by my bucket. People come, and it's interesting to see which style of nativity scene attracts different people, and the memories that they get when they look and see one. Oh, we had one like that when I was a child, and the stories that they have about their own nativity sets. So it's fun to share my stories and hear their stories too. Well, that's always the problem with all the people who collect. They hope they can find a museum that would like to take them. People want to or have to get rid of their collections. They try to find someplace else that would like to keep the whole collection. I feel like, as I say, my son can have a big sale and sell them for whatever he can get.
A lumber industry began early in Winona's history. The industry grew into 4 lumber mills located on Winona's Mississippi levee. But by the early 20th century, little remained of the once robust and profitable industry.
As Winona grew after settlement, the need for lumber to construct the buildings caused the development of a lumber industry. In 1855, Luther Wyckoff and James Highlands began operation of this first sawmill in Winona. Within a couple of years, 4 sawmills were operating in the city. With the increasing number of sawmills in the city, it became necessary to obtain a large and consistent supply of wood for the mills. The most adequate nearby source was Wisconsin's Chippewa River Valley, and the Chippewa River was the means of moving the logs to the mills. Near the mouth of the Chippewa River was Beef Slough, an area of water that was large enough to assemble the logs into rafts for transfer to the Winona mills. Large camps were established for crews that were sent into the forests during the winter to cut the trees. The cut logs loaded onto sleds and were pulled and stacked along the riverbanks. Then, during the spring thaw, the logs were pushed into the river and floated to Beef Slough, where they were bound into rafts. The rafts were then towed by paddleboats down the Mississippi River to the 4 sawmills that were located along Winona's levee. Once at the mills, the rafts were broken and the logs were moved into the mills and sawed into boards. The boards were stacked into large piles and dried. The dried lumber was later planed smooth, and some of it was used in the manufacture of window sashes, doors, and other wood products. This story of the past is brought to you by the Winona County Historical Society.
We've reached the end of this episode's tour off 90. Thanks for riding along. See you next time, somewhere off 90.
Funding for Off 90 is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.